Yes, okay. So sleep recommendations, kind of look at this chart. Just want to emphasize again, most teens are not getting the sleep they need. Most even school-age kids aren't getting the sleep they need. And when you do get the sleep you need, you'll probably notice a world of difference in yourself and in others. One thing I want to kind of say is the NCAA goals study found that getting good sleep was the third most common thing athletes reported that their coaches talked about more, up there with preparing for a career after college and figuring out nutrition. So it's something that the students want. It's something that they're really receptive to. I've done a lot of work with different teams. Everybody has questions about sleep. And it's a real low stigma conversation starter. It's not one of those things where you're like, so any mental health concerns? And it goes quiet. If you say, hey, how are you sleeping? How can we make it better? That's guaranteed to increase discussion. And probably some of that discussion will be around mental health issues. All right, and so this is that article in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, a wake-up call for collegiate athlete sleep, narrative review and consensus recommendations. So this has both a long review on everything I'm going to talk about today and more, plus the official recommendations. The first one is just to conduct a time demand survey annually. There seems to be a mismatch between what college athletes are experiencing and what their coaches and athletic trainers think they're experiencing in terms of time demands. I'm not sure how many of you have seen the sort of very ill-received video released around this time last year from the NCAA Student and Athlete A Day in the Life, which has this perky person going through everything and being happy. A lot of professional athletes responded with sort of mocking interview videos that sort of displayed a lot of the angst and the grind of that experience. Victoria Garrick, who is a Stanford volleyball player, has a fantastic TED Talk, a TEDx talk on sleep and mental health, and she's a great speaker as well to speak around those topics. But she talks about just the grind of the schedule and how much that wears down. And she basically, this is one of the first schedules we developed where we had everybody involved really look through, okay, when are you traveling? When are you getting your ankles taped? When do you have team meetings? When are you doing club meetings? So just that everybody's on the same page with how much time you're spending and how much of this time really should be sleep is a big thing. So Victoria Garrick's talk does this, and then she says, look, in these little blocks of time I have left, what I do basically is cry miserably. She wishes she were kidding, but that schedule kind of led to her developing anxiety and depression. So just kind of get everybody on the same page. I've talked with one Big East team, softball team, who had their best season ever after the coach kind of sat down with all the players and talked through, okay, what are the pros, cons? If we schedule doubleheader, what does that mean? It means one less travel day, but this and this and this. So just kind of getting a better understanding of where the players were with respect to sleep and schedule and the implications of that, and talking through time demands was really helpful for her, and she just had a fantastic team. All right, recommendation 2, and this is getting a lot of attention these days, is consumer sleep technology. So that's basically anything that you can buy an app on your phone, or some of these like Whoops, which are $500 per player that measures every heartbeat. So we had a lot of discussion around this, but the consensus was that if you're going to use it, and we're of mixed opinion on whether the pros and cons of it, make sure it's compliant with HIPAA and FERPA. So who owns this data is going to be extremely important. So at like West Virginia University, the football team and the baseball team are all required to wear Whoops, but not on the weekend, which is kind of weird to me. From a sleep research, you should track all the sleep if you're going to track it. But it's used almost as a punitive way. So if students don't get good sleep, then the players have to do kind of running or more punitive measures. So I think that's sort of a bad way to use it, as sort of almost a stalkery. I can tell what you're doing with every single heartbeat. The data piece is also really interesting too. I was at Ohio Valley Conference 1 month ago and was talking to a lawyer there who said one team had a Title IX complaint, a sexual assault issue, where their sleep tracking data for a player was actually used as evidence, because from that you can get a lot of very personal details about what your heart rate is doing, when you're awake, when you're not, and it's some pretty personal stuff. So it can get really tricky if you have a couple people who have all this access to data. I think it's best in the hands of the players if it works for them. So how it can help. So I like to use the sleep cycle alarm clock. There's other ones that are like this. If I'm going to use an alarm clock, I use this one. And it's helpful for just kind of giving you an overall sense of, oh, this week I was averaging around 7 hours of sleep. Oh, it tells me I sleep better after I exercise. I sleep better on sunny days and rainy days. And it also helps you wake up in REM sleep. So REM sleep is light sleep, and that's a stage of sleep that it feels comfortable to wake up from. If you wake up from non-REM sleep, it feels like you've been hit with a ton of bricks, or you're just like, it's called sleep inertia or sleep drunkenness. If you wake up from a dream, it feels more natural because your brain is already going at the RPMs it's supposed to be for wake. So this is the type of thing that can wake you up in sleep, in the right stage of sleep, and it can also help you just give your own data. So I think it's good to assess student sleep. I think it would be great to have like a weekly dashboard when it's like, hey, on average, how many hours of sleep are you getting? Or maybe a student kind of checking in season with how many hours of sleep did you get last night, as sort of a way to just check in. But with that, know that people's self-assessments are usually off by 45 minutes or an hour. They overestimate sleep. And so self-assessment is up. And that I think you get the most bang for your buck if you just identify the people who are really struggling and then treat them, and then do more of a public health, we really want you to sleep more, rather than intensively tracking each person's sleep every night. I feel like that's kind of a waste of resources, especially if it's done without education. So one of the ways it can help, it gives students better ownership of their own sleep and more information. So students have come up to me and was like, oh yeah, this is the way I normally sleep. And here I went to sleep after a lot of Red Bull, except my sleep quality was total crap. I only had 5 hours in bed, and it wasn't that deep sleep I'm used to. One downside of sleep tracking is actually people are getting an anxiety over their sleep tracking. So there's a new condition now called orthosomnia, where people are so obsessed with the quality of their sleep that they lose sleep because of it. There's also a big placebo effect of sleep. So if you tell somebody, wow, your sleep quality was only like 35%, they're going to perform worse that day than if they didn't see that data, even if they had just fine sleep. If you tell the same group of sleepers, you guys slept great, you guys slept like crap, the people who think they slept like crap are going to have lower performance in many different ways. So it's one of those, like, food tracking is great for some, not good for others. Emily, question.
Yes, so we actually received a question. You mentioning the quality of sleep, and this kind of backtracking a little bit, but you mentioned 65 degrees being the optimal sleep temperature. What is it about 65 degrees that makes it the optimal sleep temperature?
65 or lower. So basically, when you're sleeping, your body temperature drops. Your core body temperature drops, and it's a way for you both to kind of save energy, but also it tells you, hey, dummy, get in bed, snuggle up, get warm, and stay there. So if it's warmer than that, you're getting hot, you're throwing off the covers, you're waking up. If it's colder, you're subconsciously keeping yourself asleep and not waking up, if that makes sense. It's just evidence over evidence shows that people sleep well when it's colder. You can have as many blankets as you want, but if the room environment is cold, you stay snuggle in those blankets better.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks, Chris from Augsburg, for that question. I'll hand it back to you, Dr. Prichard. Thanks.
Perfect. Recommendation 3 is around screening, and this is something that is kind of new. So I don't think many teams I've talked to in the last couple of years have been doing this. Incorporating sleep screening into the pre-participation exam. So as players are on coming board in the preseason is a great way to kind of see who's struggling with sleep and what they could do for it. I know when I was working with our soccer team, we had players coming in from overseas who were working with kind of getting a new jet lag, getting that over with. Some people had questions about their stimulant medications from ADHD and what's the best time to take that and how they can't wake up for morning practice. So there's a lot of things that you can kind of nip in the bud early in the season if you figure out who's struggling with sleep. So purposeful sleep screening. Number one, identify those who need medical or psychological support for sleep early on. And those are two different things. There's, okay, broadly speaking, things that can interrupt your sleep. One, a sleep disorder, in which case you need medical help, right? And that might be 5 to 10% of student athletes, much bigger in the broader population. Two, is probably the more common, is just like behavioral modifications. You're not doing behaviors that are good for sleep. Your room is not set up for sleep. You're on your iPad or your phone way too late. You've got too much blue light hitting you in the evening. You're drinking your caffeine or your post-workout supplement that has caffeine too late in the day. So a lot of these are easy fixes of just like, don't do that and your sleep is better. Maybe 20% of student athletes, especially the sort of type A, high-strung anxiety folks that happen to make really good athletes because they're very, very dedicated to it, might need a lot more tools for handling anxiety so that they can transition from being in a very tense state, trying to make everything work, to going to sleep. Is there questions? Okay. So those three things, is it behavioral, is it physiological, is it psychological? If you can identify the people that are struggling with those, give them the tools they need early on, it's going to make a world of difference in overall team performance and individual performance. Two, I think it really helps student athletes know that this is something that we care about. This is something that's central to health and performance. We're asking about it, we're measuring it, we're investing in it, we're like giving you the resources to problem solve. So it's not one of those things, it's like, hey, do that, and I'm not going to mention it again.
So Dr. Prichard, we have another question now.
Yeah.
This one's from Faith from Concordia. What is your recommendation for when athletes should stop using their phones or computers before bed? Great question.
Okay. So the official word from the Sleep Society, American Academy of Sleep Medicine, is 2 hours. That's totally not going to work in any kind of college student's life. I say, can you give me 30 minutes? Like at least 30 minutes would go a long way. If you can turn off devices and put them in totally off, and some students actually need education of like, you can make it still so your mom could still call in an emergency and get through. You can do some of that phone stuff, but have it off, power down. That gives you a chance to do shower, gives you a chance to do stretching, it gives you a chance to do visualization, which is a really good kind of thing that can enhance athletic performance too. So there's a lot of things you can do if you can just get in the habit of doing phones off. I know some teams have been doing group text from captains, so sort of automated, like, hey, this is if we want to be up by 8 tomorrow for the bus, you need to be in bed now. This is the time you need to turn off your phones and start getting ready. So it's a nudge in the right direction.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Faith. Great question.
A few quick questions. So I'll talk a little bit about what a full sleep kind of assessment is. But if you just ask a couple things, that can really help you figure out a lot. One is total sleep time. So how much time do you sleep? You can figure out week and weekends. That's great. Sleep latency, that's SL. How long does it take you to fall asleep? If it is taking you under 5 minutes, that's a red flag that you are exhausted and carrying a huge sleep debt. If it is more than 20 minutes, that's another red flag, but it could be a lot of different reasons. It could be you're not sleeping in your circadian rhythm best zone. It could be that you're not giving your body enough chance to wind down. It could be that you have too much caffeine in your system. It could be a lot of different things. Could be that you have pre-sleep cognitive arousal, which is just laying in bed worrying about things, which a lot of students do. And then reaction time. So that's easy to measure, and it correlates so much to your total sleep time. It's one of those kind of things that students can be competitive about and also see like, oh, I'm not the quickest person on the team. Perhaps if I slept more, I could be a little bit quicker. So that's one of those things. Swimmers, sprinters, anybody who's responding to a quick sound, wrestlers, you are 17% faster when you're well rested than when you're not. So if you can be 17% faster on every single play, like you've basically won a lot of games. So that's maybe a 40 millisecond difference, 30 to 40 millisecond difference. So if you're sprinters, think of all the margins that are 30 to 40 milliseconds. I'm going to kind of maybe skip this. I know we're getting almost to question asking time, but there's a lot of different things a full sleep assessment will go through. That includes what sort of sleep disorders might you have, what medications are you on. A lot of students are doing like medical CBD and theanine and melatonin and all these other cocktails to get to sleep. So it can get tricky, and this is a part where somebody who's trained in this can really help. What interferes? Yeah.
We've got another question. So we have, what is the ideal time for athletes to take to fall asleep? Like how long should it take them to fall asleep? And then second, what is an easy way, if there is an easy way, to test reaction time across athletes, if you've used any of these in your study?
Yep. So there are a lot of apps that can measure reaction time. It's just on a cell phone, like pew, pew. I think I use one more for psychology experiments, which I'm blanking on the name. It's like My Psych Toolkit or something. But I know there's a lot of apps where you could just, you see the X, you press the space bar, that tells you your reaction time. And a lot of them are free. Awesome. Let's see. The first question, how long should athletes take to fall asleep? Yep. 10 to 20 minutes is great. If it's longer than 20, 30, I'm worried. If it's under 5, I'm worried. And I should mention this. If students are falling asleep everywhere, like as soon as they get on the bus, they're asleep. If they're getting their ankles taped and they fall asleep, those are big red flags. They're not getting enough sleep.
Awesome. Great question. Thanks, Dr. Prichard, and thank you, Whitney, for the question.
So what interferes with student sleep? There's a bunch of things going on here. I kind of put some big time bubbles or in proportion to what they're experiencing. One is they're just not giving themselves enough time to sleep. This is college students in general. I'll give you another one that's athlete specific. Time management. So they're coming from highly structured, everybody's telling them what to do lives, to kind of figuring out how to prioritize time on their own. So we've actually found it very useful to work with some of our academic counseling staff to talk about how if you study in brief intervals, just like HIIT training, like HIIT training, there's HIIT studying, and that's better for you to get information than to do it all at once. Poor sleep hygiene, so unplug the Christmas lights in your bedroom when you're trying to fall asleep, that kind of stuff. Emotion regulation is huge. How do you figure out, yes, your embarrassing play was tweeted 500 times. How do you let go of that and fall asleep, right? That's a tool that psychologists can help with. There's a lot of substance use and misuse, and there's a lot more substances, like the vaping is huge. Tobacco is so bad for sleep, and I know that's common in a lot of baseball, and hockey is kind of creeping up with more tobacco use. And then there's some biological disorders like restless legs, sleep apnea, narcolepsy. Delayed phase is something you can get accommodations for. So some students are just extreme night owls, where it really doesn't make sense for them to come to 6 a.m. lift or 6 a.m. swim practice. I've had University of Richmond swim coach has done a lot of work figuring out who the night owls are and making accommodations for them. And after 3 years, their total sleep time went up for the team 45 minutes, and their GPA went way up as well. Okay, challenges student athletes. There's a lot more. I think that's all the bubbles here. But along with everything else, student athletes just spend a lot of time training. A lot of them haven't figured out quite how to get the nutrition in during the day and are super hungry at night. So making sure that they're getting enough food earlier in the day, which is not to say you need to wake them up early for breakfast. That gets into one of those sleep myths. So I was talking to one track coach who was waking up the players on the weekends to have breakfast and cutting short their sleep. And I'm like, you don't need to do that. They're going to eat when they're hungry, but you need to make sure that there's food, good, high quality food available for when they are awake. Pre-meet anxiety, irregularly timed meals, pain peaks at night as you're falling asleep. So a lot of student athletes struggle with that as well. I want to pause and see if there's any questions. Nope. Okay.
So we have one, what is your take on naps and the timing of naps?
Ooh, great question. So there's a couple different kinds of naps. What you want to avoid is if somebody has trouble falling asleep at night, you don't want them to have long naps or naps too late in the evening. So for people who might have delayed phase or insomnia, having a nap is just going to make their nighttime sleep worse. And nighttime sleep is better than a nap. Having said that, naps are good. A 20-minute nap is like a refresher nap, a cat nap. The thing with the 20-minute nap is if you have good sleep, you're not getting into deep sleep. So you can go get like a little bit of light sleep and come out 20 minutes later very refreshed. So I've got some of our St. Thomas coaches freely admitting to having cat naps now and having signs in their office that say, I'm napping now, which is great. Nap culture is great. A restorative nap is going to be more like 2 or 3 hours where you're getting the full REM cycle in. So you're getting non-REM slow wave sleep and REM sleep in. So I'm working with first responders, police and firefighters to say like, okay, you guys are working shift work. How do we get you maybe 5 of these hour-and-a-half cycles in a 24-hour period? And that might mean taking a longer 2-hour nap. And some of the research shows for college athletes, if they're sleeping 7 hours and having a 2-hour nap, it's as good as if they slept 9 hours. The thing is, you don't want them athletic. If it's a long 2-hour nap, you want them to have maybe a couple hours before they're performing. So you don't want to go from a deep nap into an evening game. But generally, if you're napping, it's a sign that you need more sleep. And naps can be good. And a lot of these people really, really need more sleep.
Perfect. So another follow-up question. So one question is, we have athletes who worry as they're trying to fall asleep about performing and schoolwork. The worrying itself causes them to stay up and worry more about not getting enough sleep. Do you have any recommendations on what they can do to stop this cycle of worrying?
Yes. So one, if they have a good baseline sleep and have one bad day of sleep, there's a lot of great research that's kind of like if you have good nutrition, one bad meal isn't going to screw up your life. So if you have a good base of sleep, if it's like the day before a big meet, there hasn't been really a lot of evidence showing that one bad day is going to throw off everything. I think it's also for traveling teams, sometimes there's worry that they won't wake up in time. So having seniors or captains do door knocking can be assuring to some who aren't going to be like, I'm waking up every 45 minutes to check the time. That can be another thing. But the biggest response is, how do you stop that cycle of negative thinking, which can be, it can be catastrophizing is the actual psychological word for it, where you think of the worst outcome and then the worst outcome and the worst outcome from there. So that is a tool that responds really well to cognitive behavioral psychology. So if you can connect, if you happen to have access to a sports psychologist, great. If not, all psychologists have that in their toolbox. Is what are some ways, if you notice that you're having this cycle of negative thoughts, to interrupt that? So that could be deep breathing exercises. It could be, so we've recorded from our wellness center a lot of great podcasts that are relaxation podcasts and focusing on something else. So I would say work with your local resources, the psychologist on your campus, to say, what should we do with this particular problem? There's a lot of really specific techniques that can help.
Perfect.
All right. Task force recommendations 4 and 5 are basically to provide both the players and coaches, trainers, staff with good information on what is good sleep, what is the role of sleep in optimizing athletic performance and overall academic performance and well-being, how it's kind of a three-fer: better athlete, better student, happier person, and what are strategies for addressing sleep barriers. And this is one where I really encourage us to open conversation with the student athletes. We found out that one thing was a really easy fix. The snowplows are coming way too early in the morning around the student dorms where a lot of our athletes were. And so all we had to do was talk to the grounds crew and say, hey, let's do the faculty lots first and leave the student dorms last. And that was an easy fix. So sometimes it is surprisingly easy. Sometimes it's more like, we are no longer allowing you to travel with PlayStations to athletic meets. So some of those strategies are pretty easy. So how is sleep woven into team culture, like good nutrition is? So ask yourself, like, we hand out earplugs and eye mask. Any students who's struggling with sleep can come get those from our wellness center. Do you have little travel kits for the bus or the plane to make sure that people can have a better quality nap? Are you checking in and asking and supporting it in different ways? So we have maybe 10 minutes left. I'm not sure. I've got a ton more slides about sleep and athletic performance. The questions I'd want to leave you with, and hopefully we'll have time to discuss, is how does your team communicate the importance of it? Like, how are you really saying this is something we value and are invested in? What specifically are your students struggling with, and how do you assess it? I want to pause there and see what questions we have, and I can maybe go to the slide that has it.
Perfect. Well, we just have one question real quick. Are there any good infographics out there that our coaches can get a hold of so they can come back and share some of these key points with their athletes?
Yeah, we actually made one. There's an infographic associated with that article, and we made one that the NCAA requested, so I can email that to you. That's just like how to sleep.
That would be awesome.
Increase athletic performance. So there's like your bench press is 20 pounds more, your court and a half sprint is 3/4 of a second less, your 40-yard sprint is 1/10 of a second down. So a lot of those kind of little tidbits.
Perfect. Okay. And then along with that, we will be sharing the webinar with all of you coaches afterwards, so you can have it on demand. But yes, I will get that from Dr. Prichard and can send it out to all of you. And thank you all so much for asking these questions. Keep them coming. We've got Dr. Prichard here for a few more minutes and want to make the most of her time and your time as well. So we encourage you to keep asking great questions. Otherwise, Dr. Prichard, and you can go ahead.
I can keep going if you want.
Yep.
Okay. So in Division 3, what I want to do, can you guys see all the numbers here? Okay. So basically, who is getting good sleep? Probably we want people in this 8 hours or more range. That's only about 1 out of 5 student athletes. Maybe 50% are getting the bare minimum recommended for adults, which is 7 to 9. So if you can really concentrate on these students that are in the 6 hours or less category, that's where you're going to see the biggest increase. And that's where you can probably see a lot of inconsistency in player performance, where like they're great, but they're injured a lot. They're great, but their emotions get the best of them, and then they foul and make poor decisions. So that's kind of where we see a lot of poor sleep showing up, is in reduced capacity for split-second decision-making, and increased injury rates and more emotional distress.
So Dr. Prichard, we got a couple more questions here. One is regarding the Sleep Cycle app. So I've had bad luck with my phone battery draining with using this app. Have you noticed that? And is there any way to combat that?
So you have to have it plugged in and charging when you're using it overnight. But I only use it like if I need an early flight, so I'm not a daily user of it.
Got it.
And there's other apps. There's a lot of these kind of smart apps that are basically what you want to look for is they can distinguish when you're in non-REM and REM sleep, and they do that through listening through your breathing, and they'll wake you up gradually when you're in REM sleep, which is a more natural way to wake up. So I think SleepBot is one of them. There's some others that you can look through.
Got it. And then one more question on the importance of sleep routine. Is one more important than the other as far as having a consistent bedtime versus a consistent wake time? Or are they of equal importance?
The answer to that is kind of going to depend on whether you're a morning person or night person or what's harder for you to do regularly. So if you do the thing that's harder for you to do regularly, that's going to make the biggest difference. So I'm a morning person. Even if I've had the great fortune of staying up playing poker till 2, I wake up at 6. Just here I am, I've woken up. So for me, it's important to kind of go to bed at the regular schedule because I always wake up at the same time. So it kind of is individual based. With most students, I would say having a regular morning wake up time is more important. But I would let them sleep in an extra hour or even 90 minutes on the weekends, as long as they can get to bed okay on the weeknights or on like Sunday night.
Perfect. And then one more question. So we educate students about the importance of sleep, but even so, we still hear of some students pulling all-night study sessions where they don't sleep the entire night. What are some of the repercussions of this? And does it have a major impact, or because it is only one night, does it not impact that much?
So there are some major like total sleep deprivation results. You're not very good at integrating complex information when you do that. So your reaction time goes down, your food craving is all off, and you're not good at answering complex questions or making kind of complicated moral decisions if you've done that. It might be fine for memorizing a list of 40 words, but it's not good for other types of academic performance. And I would imagine it's really not good for, and I would encourage you to go to the article, which I think has a summary of the total sleep deprivation experiments on athletic performance, including vertical jump and other things.
Perfect.
So one of the things we do at St. Thomas is, instead of doing like midnight breakfast around finals, is we do 3 or 4 weeks before, we do stress less. So you come to the library, there's like, you check your phone in at the door, there's massage tables, there's coloring, but it's basically there to encourage you to work before, so it's not panic at the end. So I like kind of people rethinking the we're going to feed into this whole everything's a crisis at the end mentality to say, let's stretch it out and actually pre-prepare.
Perfect. All right. So I know we're running really low on time here. So we have one more question that we'll ask, and then we'll just kind of get any final tips or tricks you might have for our coaches and administrators here. But the question we have is, other than just preaching the importance of sleep to our athletes, do you have any specific tips on kind of how to get through to the athletes about the importance of their sleep? And then just the question I have relating to that is just more on a consistent basis, because I know we can hear you speak on this and it's fantastic, but then a lot of times I know student athletes have the tendency to just kind of forget about it, and then 2 days later they're back to their old habits. Do you have any recommendations on how to make it
So
sustainable?
here I would take advantage of your team leadership for near peers or peer education. Us old people talking about it isn't going to make that much of a difference in students' lives. But to hear like our Parker Rosenow, who was a great cross-country track steeplechaser, say, oh, I did sleep extension and I went from sleeping 7 to around 8.5. And when I did that, my steeplechase time dropped by 35 seconds in a season. That's crazy, right? To hear our Paige Gurns, our point guard a couple seasons back, say, oh, when I started sleeping a lot more, my 3-point percentage doubled, right? So I would figure out who is a good sleeper. Probably you're not going to be surprised to find it's the people that have their stuff together, they have the good grades, they show up and they're on, and use those to say, yeah, here's how I really value sleep. Or to say, before, when I was a freshman, I didn't, and I was sick all the time, and I missed these meets, now I do. So figure out who the good sleepers are and use them as evangelists.
Perfect. And then I know we're at our 45 minutes here, but just real quick, any last second tips or tricks you might have for our coaches or administrators here, Dr. Prichard?
I would really just recommend having that conversation, a full conversation with your team on the topic, they are going to be really open to talking about it, really opening to share, and opening to problem solving. So I think when you do that, you learn a lot of information, and it's a good sort of trust and empathy building exercise, and you get some great tips that way. And to also use the resources that you have on campus through psychology, student support services. A lot of them have probably thought about ways to increase sleep and would be happy to do a presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Prichard. And
Absolutely.
Thank you everybody so much for all your questions and everything. I'll just hand it back to Dan real quick for some final words before we let you all go. Dan, any final words here?
I'll wrap it up here, but thank you, Roxanne. That was excellent. Sleep is super important, as you read, and I think as you look at it, you need sleep, you need food, and so those are some key elements to performance for our student athletes, and even daily life and living. So, as just heard, mental health is another key point, and Emily is working on another coaches educational webinar that we will do hopefully in the next few weeks with Premier Sport that has worked with us in the past, and they're planning to help us and help our coaches. So watch for an email from Emily once we get that date set. But I hope that you all take care of yourselves, stay in, and be safe and be smart. But we're going to keep going forward here. So thanks, everybody, again. Good to see you all. That concludes today.
Okay, take care. Thank you.
Thank you.